Have you always wanted to grow some of your own food, but thought you couldn't because you have little or no outdoor space? Well, think again. Limited space doesn't have to limit your harvest. In this session, we're going to compost old ideas about gardening and plant fresh new ones to get you growing. So let's get started. Hey there, I'm Julie Stonefelt. I am an author, educator, a park ranger, and co-founder of Wild Homestead Living, where we are on a mission to make sustainability simple, whether you live in the city, country, or somewhere in between. Altogether, I've got more than 28 years of professional experience helping people connect with nature, and I'm excited to help you connect with your future garden in this session. In our time together, I'm going to give you some practical tips, creative solutions, and real-world advice about how you can turn your small spaces into thriving edible gardens. In section 1, we're going to cover the biggest myth that comes with gardening. In section 2, we're going to cover some of the most common things that people get wrong when they start thinking about growing their own food. In section 3, we're going to cover the basics of growing well. In section 4, I'm going to cover the best thing to grow in small spaces, starting from no outdoor space all the way up to having some backyard space and everything in between. In section 5, I'm going to share with you my top resource to get you growing quickly. What makes someone a great gardener instead of just a good one? They have killed more plants. Unknown. So here we are in section 1, where I'm going to dispel the biggest myth with gardening right off the top. Are you ready for it? It's that you either have a green thumb or you don't. Gardening is a skill, just like playing the piano or learning to golf. There might be some natural talent initially, but it's really the practice and the effort that you put in that make you great. And let me use my own story as an example to show you that there really is no magic to it. If you were to casually scroll through the social media feed for Wild Homestead Living these days, you would probably see our big garden on acreage out in the country where we are growing all sorts of fresh food. But life has not always looked this way, not even close. Over the last couple of decades, I have killed many plants. My immediate family that I grew up with were not farmers and not gardeners, and we didn't live rural. But my ancestors, just like your ancestors, lived closer to the land. There was a time where my family and my ancestors knew how to coax food from seeds from the ground. But by the time of my grandparents' generation, they had lost that connection to the land and growing their own food. And in fact, for them, after World War II, it was a status symbol to not have to grow your own food and to be able to get everything you needed from a supermarket. The first time I ate a vegetable straight from a garden, I stole it. Across the street from my little suburban house outside of Seattle was a park that was next to a community garden. And one year, someone grew peas up the chain link fence that separated the two. Out of curiosity, I pulled one of the peas from that fence and ate it, and it was a life-changing experience. I was about 6 years old, and I tried to get my family to grow a garden in our yard or at the community garden, but nobody was interested. A few years later, I got a hold of some vegetable seeds, and I think I must have got them in some kind of children's fast food Happy Meal. I tried growing them in the dust of our front yard in a mud pie, and of course, nothing emerged. But the seeds of my desire to grow my own food had been planted. It wouldn't be until many years later, when I was in college, that I had the opportunity to work on large-scale organic farms. And there, my desire to grow food was renewed, but I really only learned how to harvest food on a large scale, and I didn't learn how to be a home gardener. The first opportunity I had to grow my very own garden was in my early 20s, when my husband and I had the opportunity to plant a garden about the size of a bathtub at a rental duplex. Nothing that emerged looked anything close to the pictures on the seed packets. And at first I thought that meant I was a failure. Now, this was before the internet was much of a thing. And so I didn't have a lot of answers at my fingertips. I sought out a nursery where I could go and learn more from the people who worked there, from the photocopied tip sheets that they had, and the book recommendations that I got and looked up at the library. Little by little, I got better at growing food. Eventually, we moved to a bigger rental unit with more yard space and a wonderful landlord who let me rip up the entire front yard to grow food. And I became known as the lady with corn in her front yard. I started to really master my gardening skills on that little patch of urban land. And then after surviving breast cancer the first time, we moved to a bigger piece of land in the country where I could finally start living my dream. A dream where I could start using my mind, my heart, and my hands to create more of what we needed to survive, including a really big garden. It's now been over 2 decades since my very first tiny failed home garden. And every year I still have successes and I have failures, including the year that I accidentally poisoned my entire garden with contaminated straw mulch. But that's a story for a different day. I hope that my story helps to inspire you, whether you have started to garden and have felt like a failure, or you've been even too scared and discouraged to even begin. What I want you to know more than anything is this, is that growing your own food is only just a little bit about production. There's a deep satisfaction and confidence and trust in yourself that can be built by learning to grow your own food. You grow as a human being along with your plants. And it's more important than ever to get started on that journey. I hope in the following sections that I can give you some guidance and encouragement to get you growing. A seed neither fears light nor darkness, but uses both to grow. Matshona Bliweho. In this section, we're going to cover 5 things that most people get wrong about getting started growing their own groceries, growing their own food. Number 1, growing food should be easy. Hopefully my own story has given you a glimpse into how false this assumption can be, but I think it's so pervasive because most of us can walk into a grocery store or a supermarket and see a wide variety of food readily available. And we all know that farmers, and especially farm workers, are not rich. So it sets up this idea that it must be easy. But again, let me remind you that growing food, just like any skill, is learned. And especially on a home scale where you are working with your unique microclimate and set of circumstances, it's going to be a unique journey for each one of us. Number 2, you have to have land to produce food. Believe it or not, you do not need any outdoor space to start growing your own food. A sunny windowsill or a small amount of equipment can get you growing indoors right away. And we're going to talk more about that in the coming sections. Number 3, you have to invest in a lot of really expensive supplies and equipment. While there are many cool garden catalogs and nurseries out there that might convince you otherwise, there's just a few essential pieces of equipment, of supplies that you need to get started growing well. And again, we're going to cover those as we go. Number 4, all seed and plant sources are the same. I'll tell you, this is the one that got me in the beginning. A lot of what I thought was me being a bad gardener turns out that I just had a bad source of seeds. There are many really high quality, reputable sellers out there, and you can find them on the internet, and we'll talk more about looking for a source later. But really just know that the quality of your seeds or plants can make or break your garden. Number 5, you have to start from scratch. Now, if you're like me, you are a hardcore DIYer who likes to do everything on your own. But let me tell you, with gardening, there are lots of ways that you do not have to start from scratch. And that could be buying kits, it could be buying seeds that have already been started, which are little baby plants. There's lots of ways to think about this. So just know we're going to be, again, covering lots of ways that you can help to jumpstart your growing journey. So there you have it. There's 5 things that people commonly get wrong when they get started in growing. And I hope it's starting to shake things up for you, loosen the ground to get into what the basics are that you do need to get started well. Start where you are, use what you've got, do what you can. Arthur Ashe. All right, so we've talked about what most people get wrong, and now we're going to talk about what you need to get it right. How you can set yourself up to start growing well from the get-go. So I touched on how important it is to know the source of your seeds and plants and find reputable sources for them. It's also really important to understand the plants that you're growing. I like to think of it as plants having different personalities, whether it's an onion, a carrot, a piece of lettuce, a pea, all of them have different needs, just like people. None of them are right or wrong, but they're important to consider to help them thrive. Some of us get along well with others and some of us don't. It's the same with plants. Some of us like heat and some of us don't. Some of us like lots of space, some of us don't. It's all true with plants as well. I know that can seem really overwhelming initially, but trust me, at the end of this session, I'm going to give you a recommendation of a resource that you can quickly and easily get a lot of this information to begin with. No matter what you choose to grow, there are 3 really important things that all living things, all living plants need, and that is soil or substrate, sun or light, and water. Let's first talk about soil. And I'll tell you that after my mistakes with seed sources, this is the second biggest mistake I made in my early gardening years, is we tend to think of the part that emerges from the ground, the pictures that they put in the seed catalogs or on the front of the seed packets. But in order to get those kinds of results, you have to start what's in the ground, what's in your pots, wherever you're growing, because that's the stuff where your plant lives. So the higher quality potting soil or compost that you're using, or if you're doing hydroponics, which we'll talk about what that is in a moment, whatever is in that place where the roots of your plant are living, it's going to help the part of the plant that grows above ground be the healthiest and strongest. Okay, next comes water. Just like people need to stay hydrated, so do plants. But one of the common issues that I see here is, especially in indoor gardening, people tend to overwater. They tend to oversaturate their plants, and sometimes they become waterlogged and can stop thriving. In general, quick tip with watering is you want to water well so that the water gets all the way to the bottom of the pots, deep into the roots, and then let the top dry out just a bit before you water again. Now, just like every rule, there are exceptions to that, but that's just a really quick tip about watering. Okay, so light. Now, we probably all learned when we were in elementary school that plants use light to photosynthesize, which creates green, chlorophyll, and that whole scientific process. When it comes to growing your own food, the really important thing to know is that plants generally need more light than we realize, and they need a broader spectrum. So some plants can grow really well in a windowsill, and some need more light than that. Especially if you're starting seeds that are going to be planted outside, usually they need supplemental light. And these days in garden supply stores, in big box hardware stores, and all over the internet, you can find full spectrum lights in a variety of styles that can fit your space. I'm going to touch on 2 more things that can help you grow well that can easily get overlooked. And the first one is planning. Good gardening starts with good planning. Just like I mentioned, there are certain plants that grow well in certain seasons. It's important to know what those are and set yourself up for success. So for me in my area, if I want to have a really ripe, juicy tomato in August, the best time to start preparing is winter. Fortunately, it's also the time when most of us are longing for more growth and nature, and the seed catalogs start arriving. So planning out either what seeds you're going to buy or the gardening resources that you're going to reach out to, winter is a really great time for planning your whole year. At least planning a few months ahead of time is a good kind of gauge to begin with. And lastly, no matter what you're growing, what you're planning, or where you're growing it, take notes. All of us think we are going to remember our gardening better than we actually do, especially in the moment when you start and everything feels fresh and new. But I will tell you, years down the road, your memory will become fuzzy. And it's really nice to have some way to look back at what you planted and when you planted and how well it did to help you build on your success. I've tried lots of different strategies over the years, from 3-ring binders with notes to Excel spreadsheets. These days, my favorite way to go is these fun little notebooks that you can put in your pocket and just write down a few key items here and there as you're going. And they fit really well into, like I said, a pocket or a garden trug if you're doing any outdoor gardening. So those are just a few of the basics to keep in mind when you're getting started. In the next section, I'm going to cover more about what to plant in your fertile new mind of possibility. There's 2 things money can't buy. That's true love and homegrown tomatoes. Guy Clark. We have arrived at the fun part, and that is talking about seeds and plants. In this section, I'm going to talk about what works best, starting from the smallest space to the largest space relative to having limited space overall. Like I said, there are lots of things you can grow no matter how little space you have. I'm going to talk about them here. If you are living in a very small space and you have no outdoor growing space at all, this could be an apartment, a studio, a condo, in the middle of the city in a high-rise, whatever it looks like, there are things you can grow. The first and easiest recommendation I have is sprouts. You can buy seeds that are specially packaged for sprouting, and all you need is a glass jar and some mesh lids and a source of water from a faucet. Rinsing those just a few times a day, and usually within a week, you can have some really nutritious fresh food right on a windowsill. The other thing you can grow is microgreens. They're similar to sprouts in that you eat the little tiny baby plants and a whole lot of them together, but they usually need some kind of growing medium. And you can usually grow them in flats or little boxes and kits. And sometimes they need an additional light, but again, there's lots of varieties of microgreen seeds that you can find. Another option for growing indoors only is hydroponics, and that is a system of growing vegetables without soil, usually in some kind of water with a nutrient medium. And again, there are lots of kits that you can find online for this. I know people who grow these even if they do have outdoor space, but they live in places with really harsh winters. So that way they can grow fresh food all year long, even when it's not safe to spend time outside. Hydroponics take a little bit more investment in terms of usually having a shelf and hydroponic watering kits and alternative lighting sources, but they're a fun thing to explore. Another really fun one to grow indoors is mushrooms. There are lots of kits for growing things like oyster mushrooms or shiitake that you can grow without even needing very much light at all. Okay, so moving up in terms of space, maybe you have a little patio or a balcony in a townhome or an apartment or condo where you have that small outdoor space, but you don't have any in-ground space. Not a problem, there are things you can grow there too. 2 of my very favorites to grow are strawberries, which are a perennial plant, which means that the same plants will produce food year after year. And there are some fun kits you can grow using those. And in fact, I made a whole YouTube video all about growing strawberries that you can check out from Wild Homestead Living. Another option is tomatoes. I've grown them in everything from fancy pots that I bought at the garden store to laundry baskets I got for $1 at Target and just nailed some holes in the bottom of them. Another option, if you have a little more space, whether it's growing in ground or not, is a stock tank. They are the big silver containers that originally were used for putting food and water for livestock in. You get them again in lots of shapes and sizes depending on your space. If you look at our garden, we've got 13 stock tanks that are 2 feet by 4 feet. And the reason we have those is because even though we have land, it's not good land for growing. It's really rocky. And the only space we have for a big garden, we can't grow in ground due to our septic system. Now let's look at if you have a big backyard or a front yard, if you're living in a home that you own or rent and have some space. Here, some of my recommendations are doing raised beds, which can be really pretty, made out of wood or concrete, just depending on your preference and budget. And you can fill them with really good soil and grow a lot of food densely that way. Another option, if you don't have a space that you want to look like it's a vegetable garden, you can plant into your landscaping with edible landscaping. And things like herbs can have beautiful flowers, and then you can harvest along the way. No matter where you live, you can expand your growing space by finding a community garden. Most cities and towns these days have community plots where you can reserve or rent a small space that you can grow whatever you wish in them. Part of what's really fun about community gardens is you will have plots next to other people who are also gardening. It's a great way to make friends, build connections in your neighborhood, and learn from each other. Hopefully these ideas are getting you excited about all of the possibilities that are available to you, no matter what size space you have. We don't have to do it all alone. We were never meant to. Brené Brown. We've covered a lot of ground, but we've still only scratched the surface. So I've put together a quick start vegetable gardening guide for you that goes into more depth on these, as well as gives you worksheets that you can use, and my trusted recommendations for things like seeds and plants, guides, and tools. This guide is all of the stuff I wish I'd known when I first got started. It's the best way that I can share with you the garden buddy that I wish I had sitting next to me and that I can be for you as you begin your journey. You can download this guide for free at the link below or from wildhomesteadliving.com. To plant a garden is to dream of tomorrow. Audrey Hepburn. When you look at history, you can see that over and over again, people have returned to gardening in hard times. And this is not just for economic reasons. When you start connecting with the source of your food, you start connecting with nature. You start to become more self-reliant, and from that place, you are able to be more generous and helpful to others. That cycle of abundance is good for our physical well-being, it's good for our emotional and mental well-being, it's good for our families, and it's good for our communities. It's also good for this great big neighborhood that we call planet Earth. I hope that in this session, I have inspired you to take one small step in growing your own groceries, no matter what size space you're working with. And remember, there is no one right way to live sustainably, only the way that's right for you.